Authors Plus. Hello, everyone. My name is Gab Megan, and I'm from Authors Press. Today is April 16th, 2024. Welcome to another fantastic virtual interview where I am gathered here today with Mark Cobb Lewis, the author of Eyes of the Garden, A Myth Continued. Hi, Mr. Mark. Can you tell us about yourself and what inspired you to write Eyes of the Garden, A Myth Continued?
Again, yes. Again, my name is Mark Cobbs Lewis. I retired from education after working for nearly 40 years as a science teacher, school district principal, and a school district science coordinator. Uh, Throughout my career and before, I've always enjoyed storytelling. I think the first short story I ever wrote was when I worked on an oil field exploration rig right after high school and worked the midnight shift. In this rig, there were always lots of old westerns laying around. And an older gentleman I worked for, I read those books to him at night when one night he said, "College boy, why don't you write one of them books?" Well, so I went home on my family's antique typewriter and typed out shootout at the R Den Ranch. The company we worked for was Arden, Arden. Anyway, I think company copies of that story went out throughout that section of Oklahoma for quite a while, and I had fun with that. I was raised in a small Bible Belt town in Oklahoma, um, and spent a big portion of my young life attending church because that's what you did in small towns in Oklahoma. Hopefully, some of the lessons I learned while sitting in those classes uh, stuck with me the way I treat people today. Uh, at a young age, I thought I wanted to be a preacher, so I became a licensed Baptist preacher and eventually graduated from Baylor Baptist University in Waco, Texas. While I was there, I met a beautiful young woman from Japan, and because we were both teachers, we spent many of our summers in Tokyo. It was unfortunately our marriage didn't last, but I was blessed with a very beautiful daughter, and through that marriage, I also was exposed to languages and cultures and a part of the world that I'd never seen and would have never seen if I'd stuck with my small little town in Oklahoma. Uh, my other passion interests beyond writing and religion have always been uh, science and nature. So instead of becoming a preacher, I became a science teacher. Uh, and those four interests combined and the seeming incompatibility between science and religion was the inspiration behind the writing of the novel.
That's a very inspirational story. What motivated you to explore themes of friendship and supernatural connections in your book?
Okay. Uh, Ask yourself, why is it that you can sometimes sit beside a person that you've never met before, and in 5 minutes, you suddenly feel like they've been your best friends for life? Conversely, the major religions of the world, for example, Protestantism and Catholicism, Shia and Sunni Muslim, Judaism and Islam, are all constantly on the verge of violent conflict. Um, why is it? I have a 30-year-old parrot. Why is it that that parrot was best friends with my cat before my cat died and was actually very sad when he died? So uh, I I don't think either science or religion can answer those questions. Um, but the possibilities for exploring themes of friendship and interconnectedness are absolutely endless.
Those are very thought provoking notes. Could you share some of the experiences or struggles you encountered while writing this novel?
Uh, some of my biggest struggles had little to do with the actual writing of the novel. Uh, at the time I wrote it, I was undergoing several major health difficulties myself, and living in Florida. At the same time, my mother was undergoing serious health difficulties, and she was living in Oklahoma. So was spending a lot of time driving back and forth. Uh, Lots of life's little problems popped up all at the same time, and in the middle of that, my computer crashed twice. So consequently, it took me a very long time to write the book. I had also attempted never to write a story of this length and complexity. One of the fun things about writing a science fiction fantasy novel is you get to make up all the rules. The drawback to all that is you have to make those rules convincing, and then you have to remember your own rules. So I learned a lot in the process of how to keep up with what I'd written and then to connect with what I had already written. Perhaps my biggest struggle was emotional. I'm essentially a pacifist at heart and have a lot of strong pacifist leanings. But parts of the book are really quite violent. Um, I reconciled my misgivings after accepting that, as with everything else we encounter in life, we are also all interconnected with the violence in the world.
Thank you for that. The protagonist, Lucy Haddad, shares a unique bond with Joey Sanders, someone on autism spectrum. What inspired you to create these characters, and how did you approach portraying Joey's character authentically?
This is absolutely my favorite question. My entire career was spent working with kids. Most of those years, I was a middle school principal. Um, that period of life can be treacherous for both the kids and for the people who work with them. All these changes are happening at once. Hormonal, sexual, cognitive, emotional, everything's all going on at once. Uh, and but they all happen differently for every single kid at different times. Now, throw in on for example, I have two sons who look very much alike. They're not twins, but they look very much alike. But anyone not knowing them when they were growing up would have had a hard time being convinced that they were even related because both dealt with life so completely differently. Fortunately, they did grow into responsible young adults. Now, throw in on top of that, the challenges that a student dealing with autism has to face, and they face each one of those differently. I had the good fortune of when I was working with these students in the science fairs to have parents who taught me how to deal with each of their students as individuals. I had I have a sense of humor. And I always love joking with kids. I had one student that the parent was very kind with me. She said, "Mark, first of all, you can't get excited like you always do. You have to stay very calm, and you can never look at him in the face. You have to stand by his side and look out." So she taught me how to do that. Uh, his project incidentally went on, became a very big project later on, and it was one of the models for Joey Sanders' project in my book. I had another student who took everything literally, and I had to be very careful about joking because he took everything literally. I had a third student who would get so excited doing his project, he would back me in the corners and he just didn't know when to stop. I've always been a tactful person, so I couldn't find a way to stop him. So his mother finally said, "Mark, look him in the face and very calmly say, 'Stop. You won't hurt his feelings.'" She was right. I didn't hurt his feelings, and I still keep up with that student every now and then. So Joey's and even Lucy's characters are an amalgamation of the students I've worked with throughout the course of my career.
Children are very challenging and you can learn a lot from them. They're very adorable
Absolutely,
though.
they are. You have to be careful.
Yep. Your book spans various locations and tackles global issues. How did you research and develop the settings and plot to ensure authenticity and depth?
Uh, I've already mentioned I've had the good fortune to be exposed to multiple different cultures, uh, both in my travels and through my relationships in the past. So that was a big part. My educational experience also provides a major background for my book. In college, I had both I had majors in both the religions and in the sciences, so I've gotten a lot of background through there. I'm also a reader of history and the sciences. Uh, some of the settings in the book were influenced by writers such as E.O. Wilson. He was a highly respected biologist and really changed. Some people compare him to the modern day Darwin. Uh, also, Jared Diamond, who wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel, who's a powerful influence on today's people, on today's understanding of people and where they come from. And I even throw a little bit of quantum physics in the book from writers such as Brian Greene, who's a physicist writer.
Thank you for that. Throughout the story, there's a sense of interconnectedness among characters and events. How did you weave these connections into the narrative, and what message do you hope readers take away from it?
Uh, in one sense, interconnectedness is really the major theme of the book. Um, at one point in the story, the protagonists, the heroes of the story, are very frustrated and about how to figure out what the evil Roland Muldrow is and what he's going to be up to next. At that point, Joey, who's very mild and meek and again timid, very quietly says, "He is like me." Uh, at that point, the heroes understand what they're dealing with is really the flip side of their best friend. So it helps them to contact and figure out where this guy is. We live in a world that is constantly in the tiny differences between cohesiveness and conflict. Uh, and sometimes the difference between the two are just minute. We live in a world where humanity is constantly looking for superiority through tiny differences. We could solve so many more problems if we paid more attention to the overwhelming similarities that connect us all.
That's very interesting. As a retired educator, how did your background in teaching and working with students, including those on the spectrum, influence your writing of Lucy and Joey's character?
Uh, One of my earliest teachers taught me to write what you know. I know kids, and so that's almost all. And I've written other books. Almost all my books include kids in it somewhere because that's what I know. Um, I can't avoid watching some of the outlandish characters and debates we see on television, the news today, and looking at the actors involved and thinking, because of my background, I wonder what that person was like dealing with as a child in class. So sometimes in writing the characters of Lucy and Joy, I'm actually visualizing, like the science fair students, I'm actually visualizing students I've worked with before.
Thank you. Could you share the sources of your inspiration when crafting the narrative of your book?
Uh, yeah, those sources can be summed up pretty easily in two words, and that's life's experiences. I was born again, very fortunate to be born into a very loving, close knit, conservative, but also pretty insular family where they didn't see a lot of what else happened out in the world. Uh, After I left home, I realized that I was I, that after I left home, I discovered that not everyone, in fact, probably not very many people, shared my experience of how I grew up. So I let my imagination and the lives of the many people I've met throughout my life uh, take over after that in writing my book.
That's very beautiful. Beyond Eyes of the Garden, A Myth Continued, do you have any future projects or works in mind?
Yes, I've actually just finished a murder mystery entitled Mascots and Monuments, and it's in the publication phase with Authors Press right now. Um, I'm also currently writing a book entitled Eyes of the Garden, A Myth Begins. People who've read my first book read the title and say, A Myth Continues. And they asked me, Mark, is there a first book? Well, I had always envisioned the book as a trilogy. And I first watched the Star Wars trilogy when I was a young adult. And I was fascinated with the fact that those stories started in the middle and then went to the beginning and then ended up with the end. Uh, the model for my trilogy is the same. I started with the middle book. I suppose I may have to someday say book 1, 2, and 3 because there's, but I's book I'm writing now, again, A Myth Begins, is actually book number 2. And after that, I will begin working on Eyes of the Garden, The End of a Myth with a question mark, and that will be book number 3.
That's very unique and interesting. Finally, what advice would you give to aspiring authors, particularly those who may be facing their own challenges or doubts in their writing journey?
That's a good question, and it's so hard to lose confidence. I mean, excuse me, it's so easy to lose confidence in yourself and feel like I'm just going to quit. But I came up with this for myself, and I thought people may not read it. If they read it, they might not like it, and if they like it, they might not understand it. But if you want to write, write anyway. With these two caveats in mind: be kind when you can. The world always needs more kindness. And number 2, never ever write in hatred. There's already plenty of that to go around.
Those are very beautiful points. Thank you for that. Where can we purchase your book?
Okay. You can purchase the book through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Authors Press, and other reputable online bookstores.
Thank you. So you have an option to answer this question or not. We just need to ask this for us to be able to serve our authors in the future. How was your experience working with Authors Press?
I answered this question once before, but it's getting better. I'm starting to gain faith. I hope someday that I can say, yeah, this is the best company ever. So
Thank you for that.
I very appreciate what you've done recently.
Thank you. We appreciate you. That's all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for meeting with me today and discussing your book. It's been very pleasant speaking with you. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to Authors Press either via email or phone number, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. This has been Mark Cobbs Lewis and Gab Megan. Thanks for tuning in.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you.
Have a great day.
Authors Press.